Let us pray. For the joy of your presence changing and renewing us day by day, we offer you our praise. For the blessings you bring us, the outpouring of your love day by day, we offer you our praise. For peace beyond understanding, blessed assurance day by day, we offer you our praise. For the word that endures, teaches and challenges, generation to generation, we offer you our praise. On the morning of the 10th of May, 1996, two teams of mountain climbers headed for the summit of Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world. They were working together along the same route to the top. John Krakauer was one of these mountaineers, a member of one of these climbing teams. He made it to the summit, a height above sea level of 29,141 feet. Late in the afternoon of the same day, a terrible icy storm swept over the mountain, trapping many of the climbers out in the open on the exposed faces of those frozen heights. 5 men, although they were each experienced climbers, perished and died, wiped out in one storm. Krakauer, fortunately, survived the ordeal and later wrote a book about the experience. The book is entitled Into Thin Air, a dramatic tale of the events of that day. He was trying to piece together what actually happened, trying to review the events that had transpired, and to describe the tragedy as it unfolded in the course of that one dramatic afternoon. Because of the ferocity of the storm, the lack of visibility, and the lack of communication, Krakauer admits that it is almost impossible to determine what exactly happened on the various parts of the mountain, or indeed to catalogue the last minutes in the lives of the individual climbers who died, or the experience of those climbers who survived the same storm. It is a story of achievement of those who reached the top and the tragedy of those who died, both on the same day in May in 1996. That very same day as Krakauer made his bid to reach the top, another climbing team of 3 mountaineers from India went to the summit. They too reached the top. Then, using a new technology to make a phone call from the summit of Everest to New Delhi in India, from the very top of the mountain, they were able to tell the glad news of their climbing triumph. Then they started their ascent to their base camp below, before they too were caught in the icy storm. All 3 of them spent the night under horrifying conditions, enduring icy cold winds and blizzard conditions, brutally exposed to the harsh elements. On the next day, a team of Japanese climbers set out from their base camp on the mountain to make their final assault on the summit. On their way up, they passed close to the Indian climbers, who, after spending the night at that height, exposed under such conditions, were in obvious distress. The 2 Japanese climbers did not stop. They did not offer assistance. They gave no help. They just kept going up and up. About 160 feet past the Indian climbers, they stopped to rest and to change their oxygen cylinders for fresh bottles. Then they went on to conquer evidence. On their way down, they passed 2 of the Indian climbers. One was alive, one was probably now dead, and the other one was nowhere to be seen. All 3 Indian climbers perished on the mountain. When these 2 other climbers made it back to their own base camp, they were asked by reporters, why they had not offered any help to the Indian climbers, such as food or oxygen or water or even encouragement. One of them said, "We were too tired to help." Above 8,000 meters is not a place where people can afford morality. Well, that's the height of indifference, isn't it? You cannot afford morality above 24,000 feet. John Krakauer writes about summit fever in his book. It is the consuming desire to reach the top, and he explains how it develops. After all the organization to put an expedition together, the months of hard physical training to get fit, all the practice in climbing techniques on mountain cliffs, all the efforts to establish the base camps, after all the hoping, all the expense, on the day when your chance comes to climb the world's highest peak, summit fever takes over. It can propel you to take unreasonable chances. It can propel you to make morally questionable chances. It can become a selfish tunnel vision to succeed at almost any cost. Indeed, it becomes the dominant obsession that guides your life and takes over from reason or morality. Most of us, get summit fever. Even at ground level, we get summer fever. Summit fever. Have you ever competed aggressively for a supermarket parking spot on a busy Saturday morning? You see the spot and you make a dive for it, only to discover that somebody wants to cut you off, to steal your spot that you've been so patiently waiting for, the inconsiderate so-and-so. And isn't it embarrassing when you actually discover you know the person that you have sneaked or stolen the car space from, the person from across the street or from the church that you have just reduced to a loud-mouthed, embarrassing, obnoxious, screaming wreck. Yes, summit fever is alive and well at sea level. Just an illustration of the many outbreaks around in everyday life. Summit fever, self-interest in what we want to do, absorbed in ourselves, absorbed in our own agenda, selfishly climbing over the lives of others, that's the height of indifference. Ever been to a Boxing Day sale in the city? Summertime, summit fever in a large department store. Uncontrollable stampeding crowds heading for the bargain counters, pushing for positions, jostling for the bargains, polite manners and courteous behavior forgotten in the rush. A pushing, jostling crowd of very determined bargain hunters, doing to others that you would wish that they should do unto you, but doing it first. Stand back, I'm coming through. Keep your hands off that. I saw it first. That's mine. Leave that alone. Let go of it, will you? Not spoken as a request, but as an angry command. You say to your friend, what do you mean you got half a bargain? Well, the other person got the other half of it. Every one of us in this church got a clear view of summit fever when the Federal Liberal Party in Canberra fought cat and dog over the leadership and the direction of the party in August last. What an example of disgusting behavior from influential folk who are supposed to be our role models of decency, of ethical behavior and leadership. Yes, it was summit fever time in Canberra. The will to succeed at all costs. All thought of the future of Australia's welfare was forgotten. In fact, we stopped the Parliament. Values were forgotten. Friendships were forgotten. Moral values were forgotten. The need for sensitivity and consideration lost in the midst of bullying and pushing for control. Fair-mindedness disappeared. The government of the whole country placed on hold, while the deceitful manipulation of politicians continued. mainly done by selfish members of parliament to keep their jobs, or to win the leadership, or to gain a seat on the front bench, or to settle old scores, or to bully their way into positions of personal control. What we saw in Canberra was a display of personality rather than of politics, not for ethical principle, not for better government, or for the improved conditions for those who live in a country. Yes, summit fever is alive and well at sea level. It has become a cultural phenomenon in Australia, caused by the need to succeed and the need to get on in life at almost any cost, including the loss of morality, the loss of decency, and the loss of fair play. The Banking Royal Commission, too, has revealed illustrations of summit fever at the highest possible level. Corruption, immorality, lack of sensitivity, out of control ambition and greed. And the point that really hurts me is not the loss of money, but all the folk who otherwise did these things would have been considered successful in our society. Hardworking, clever Australians, the kind of people that grandparents would have talked to their friends about, how wonderful their grandchildren are getting on. They were considered successful until at least they were exposed and unmasked as unsensitive, ambitious, greedy, and selfish people entangled in a mesh of corruption and tangled corporation life. Yes, summit fever is alive and well. Every time we get so caught up in ourselves that others simply do not matter, every time we choose to be selfish and have little time for the consideration of other people, every time our priorities overshadow the needs of others, every time we forget to be truly human and fall short of our best potential, and the raw ambition to get our own way takes precedence over everything else. Now, the supermarket illustration and the Boxing Day sales illustration might have brought a smile to your faces here at St. Michael's this morning. But in reality, as I've just illustrated, summit fever stories in life are both painful and callous and uncaring. George Bernard Shaw claimed that the worst sin towards our fellow creatures is not to hate them, but to be indifferent towards them. It is the essence of inhumanity. That is why it's so vital for us as human beings to learn an alternative way of living to that of going through life with summit fever or with self-centered arrogance. Abraham Lincoln once said that too many people consider themselves to be good Christians simply because they behave decently enough to stay out of jail. Now, negative behavior will keep us out of jail, but that's not what Jesus is advocating as a vital way of dynamic living. His life and message was surely to encourage us not to fall short, or to fail, or to go amiss, but to have life and to have it abundantly. There's something more to this than just keeping the law, not just to do what is observed by others to be right, but to do the right anyway. Not just to avoid trouble or responsibility by being involved, but deliberately and intentionally taking the risk to become involved. The cure for summit fever is to believe that we are answerable to each other. Neighbors are rich men and poor, says the hymn. Neighbors are black men and white. Neighbors are nearby and far away. And if we call ourselves Christian, we are also answerable and responsible to God as well. The same God that we praise in our hymns and our prayers this morning. The same God that we meet here to worship each Sunday. The same God that we share communion with. But let us be absolutely clear. There is a cost to be answerable to and for others. It means that you and I share our worldly goods and material possessions. It means that others will count in your life and in mine, and that we will stand up for them. And not only others that you and I like, or that you and I admire, or that you and I think are deserving of sharers, but everybody. Perhaps more importantly, it's more important that we treat the people we dislike this way, people we have little regard for from different backgrounds, people we can't even stand, people we would rather avoid, people whose values we detest and even reject. These are the people in life who have to count as well. Not just the people who wear a St. Michael's name tag, not just people we meet in the Provost Club, not just people we happen to know who live down our street, but everybody. This, of course, means that we will have to act and think courageously and differently, and accept new challenges, difficult and even abnormal for us, different from our past ways of doing things, even becoming transformed in our behavior towards others, and be thought odd of by our neighbors for doing so. This might mean changing direction or altering our attitudes or what we have set our hearts on, or of being moral or honest and kind when others around us are behaving badly. For example, how many times did you hear people in Parliament saying, hey, this is not us, this is not what we stand for, let's get on with government? When did you hear people in the banking business say, hey, this is corrupt, we've got to stop this? No, it was only when people were caught, only when it was brought to the light out of the darkness that we all say, oh, I'm sorry, made a mistake. We need to be very clear about this. Being answerable will change your life, and it's not a soft option for the faint-hearted. On the other hand, being dominated in your behavior by summit fever, being self-interested in life also has its costs. There is a hardness that summit fever puts into your life. There's an emptiness that summit fever leaves in your soul. There's a barrenness present in your attitude to others. And there's a selfishness that comes to dominate your relationships. It's a me-first foundation underlying everything that you do and say and think and feel. While the choice of being answerable has its costs, the cost of summit fever also has its costs, and they are crippling, demoralizing, dispiriting, and soul-destroying. The story of Reuben in the Old Testament book of Genesis chapter 37 is a wonderful example of a man who was there for others. Reuben, standing up for his brother Joseph, that spoiled brat favorite son of Jacob. Reuben was the one who convinced his brother to put Joseph in the pit, instead of the choice of killing him there and then, as his jealous brothers would have done. But with the plan of hoping to rescue Joseph secretly later that night. But before he could do so, Joseph was sold into slavery into Egypt. And yet, had he not done so, Joseph would have died that day in the desert, and the whole history of Israel would have been drastically different. Reuben resisted the summer fever of hatred that these brothers had of Joseph. He resisted the urge to kill Joseph, the spoiled favorite of his father. Joseph hated for his arrogance and dreams of superiority. Reuben stood up for his brother, and Joseph lived on. Reuben knew that he was answerable, believing as he did that he was answerable to God, also answerable to Jacob his father, and answerable to Joseph, and so Joseph lived on. Jesus himself taught the same lesson when he stood up for the woman in adultery. When he stood up for that woman, he was not advocating sexual permissiveness. He was reminding the Pharisees and the elders and everybody listening to his words that as Jewish believers, they too were answerable to God. It's not just the laws that could tell them how to behave. They also had to consider God's mercy and justice. Reuben's action shows us how to stand up for someone. Jesus shows us the kind of life that draws us towards each other, beyond what the law or what regulation or politeness stands. Let me finish with a story. One day in Munich, Germany, in the late 1930s, when the Nazi Party was in control of the city and of the country, some Nazi SS black-shirted stormtroopers stopped a bus. They boarded it, asking each of the passengers on the bus to show their identity papers. Sitting in the front rows of the bus were some Jewish passengers who, when their identity was discovered, were asked to leave the bus under escort and to get straight onto the back of a covered truck that was waiting around the corner. In the back of the bus sat a Jewish woman. She had a very clear idea of what would happen to her if she was taken off that bus and sent onto the back of the truck. She was terrified. She began to shake. The stormtroopers made their way up the aisle of the bus, systematically checking the papers of the passengers as they went towards the back. When they were almost up to her place in the bus, the man next to the Jewish woman suddenly stood up, shouting and screaming and yelling at her, waving his arms around, showing great signs of agitation. He called her stupid. He called her irresponsible, dim-witted, and dense. Oh, he used such colorful language. He was most unpleasant in the things he said. She did not know him. She had never set eyes on him before. She had no idea what he was doing. She simply looked startled and visibly shocked at this sudden and noisy verbal outburst. The SS men demanded what all the shouting was about, and the man said with some heated irritation, "Oh, my wife has forgotten her papers again. I'm so fed up. She makes me so angry. She's always doing this. She never thinks. She's a completely brainless creature." The soldiers checked his papers, looked at the woman who had just been given such a serve, cowering in the corner of the seat, laughed at her loudly, and moved off the bus. The man said nothing else. She never saw him again. She never learned his name. He was a complete stranger. She got off at the next stop and disappeared into the crowds. She was his Joseph. He was her Reuben. The question I'd like to ask you today, are you answerable? Who is your Joseph? It may be a stranger, maybe a child. It might be some of the people that Professor Catherine was speaking about today. It might be a foreigner to our shores. It might be someone suffering injustice or loneliness or prejudice, someone you've never met. It may be someone in pain and bereavement or loss. It might be somebody you know really well, or a person that you presently ignore. It's a challenge to us of applied Christianity and of common humanity. Answerability has its cost. Summit fever has its cost. And the question that this morning I'd like to ask is, what costs are you prepared to pay? Having dynamic spiritual strength that will keep us answerable to God as well as to our neighbor will certainly help our efforts. Heights of indifference or depths of caring. It's surely our choice to make in the days and tomorrows of our lives. The results of our actions and the results of our attitudes will speak for themselves. We will surely do better if our lives are rooted and grounded in God, and if our ethical basis is solid and secure. Not people who wobble around like an ethical jelly on a plate. Not good. Think about it.